Hello everybody and welcome to this painting video with myself, John. In this one we're going to be tackling the M4A3 Jumbo Shermans, the M4A3E2 if I recall right, and we're going to be painting it in a winter scheme, so we're going to be using some techniques to show you how to do a whitewash effect on your vehicles. This one has turned out particularly well. I'm quite happy with it, and I think when I go to do a Bulge American list, I have a feeling I'm going to do it like this because it gives us a unique finish. It gives us a very unique looking vehicle, as well as what's going to be across several vehicles, a unique looking army as well. So in general, this is quite a good one. Do check it out, do have a look at it. I hope you enjoy it, and without any further ado, let's get stuck in.
So to start with our Jumbo, I thought this time I would start with the model completely untouched, just built and ready for priming, because I want to airbrush prime. So for the airbrushing, we're going to be using the Stynylrez, I think this is from Badger, the airbrush primer. This is one of the oldest paints I currently have in here. I think the bottle itself is about 7 or 8 years old, probably more. And we're putting it through my airbrush, which is one of the Green Stuff World airbrushes. It's the 0.31. Find this to be a very reliable brush for doing the tasks of priming and pre-shading, stuff like that. So we've put that into the airbrush neat. We haven't thinned it. It just seems to work nicer that way. So we're going to switch our compressor on, and we're going to give our Sherman a few coats of this just to make sure we have the best possible finish. So I'm going to make sure it's working properly. And away we go. With the turret as well. I should have done that first. With the priming done, I've done about three coats, maybe 3-4 coats of our black, and what we've got is this perfectly lovely looking smooth finish, and it really helps settle everything down and makes it ready for our next step, which is going to be our olive green. And for that we're going to be using Vallejo acrylic olive drab, just US olive drab. It's the recommended paint from the Flames of War range, so this is the color they want you to paint their American vehicles. So we have that in the airbrush. We have it thinned roughly 3:1 in the pot, but it's with water instead of actual thinner. I think my airbrush, or whatever way I've taken care of it, is messing up a little bit, so water is the safer option here. Now, we're going to remove the turret this time as well, because we don't want it flying off and damaging itself. So we're going to give everything on the vehicle a good couple of coats of the olive drab, and that'll make it ready for our next step, which will be applying decals. So let's get the compressor fired up, and let's get our olive drab down. So again, just a little test piece. Seems okay. So with the olive green now down and dry, we can have a look around the vehicle and see what we think. It's a good smooth finish. We have the slightest bit of shading. It's not really going to matter too much as we go on to subsequent layers, but we have a nice uniform looking olive drab, and I think the vehicle is looking pretty tidy. So the next step is going to be applying transfers, because we want to do that before we do our whitewash stage. Now I have the transfers already down here, cut out and soaked in water, and what I'm going to be using is some Green Stuff World decal softener, and we're going to be applying that first. I'm putting it on the top of a little thingy I have sat to one side. What I'm going to be doing is applying a thin layer of it first to the areas that we're going to be applying transfers to. So I know that markings wise, we're going to have a white star on either side of the hull. So what I'm going to do is basically take my decal softener and just apply a layer of it all down one side of the hull and hope that it doesn't reactivate the paint. And then again on the other side. Like that. We also have one bigger star that we're going to put onto the engine deck. So I'm going to apply the decal softener onto the grille because we need it to conform down onto the grille. Now that is lifting the paint a little bit, or is activating it a little, so we maybe should have let that dry a little longer. However, we're going to push on, we're going to persevere and make a mess. So you guys hate when I do this, but I'm sliding the transfer onto a knife. Now as you can see, the film that Battlefront are now using for their transfers is a little bit more robust than it used to be. So it is actually allowing me to apply it or hold it with my craft knife. I'm going to press it down onto the miniature like that. And we're going to get a little bit of wiggle time. Not much, but that's all we're going to be doing there. We then have one of our US numbers, one of our tank numbers. Again, you can see how well it sits on the end of a knife. I'm only doing that to annoy everybody that says you should be using a brush. Don't worry, I'm aware of people using brushes, but I don't want to do that. Gonna let that settle like that, and then we'll do the back one on the engine deck. Now this is where the thickness of the film may work against us here a little bit. So what we're going to do is center that up. So markings wise, the options really are a star on either side, one on the back engine deck, or a smaller star on the top of the turret. I haven't seen a lot of reference images of jumbos particularly, but I would imagine that late war, the markings were becoming quite minimalist and more attuned to, you know, friendly units being able to see it more easily. So a larger star on the back somewhere is generally what I've seen from late war tanks. So nothing on the front either, because they don't really want to draw unnecessary attention. So what we're going to do is apply the rest of the decals, and then as they dry, and hopefully the film starts to conform, we're going to be going over it again with more decal softener just to really push home that we want these transfers to settle right down. So this is going to be a bit of a time-consuming process, but when we come back, we'll be ready to work on starting our whitewash. With the decals or transfers settled as much as they can be, what I went and did after that was give the entire model a brush coat of AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish. The reason for that is we have to make sure everything is nice and settled. We've also let it dry for about an hour just to make sure. And for the subsequent step, it really is better to have a matte finish to allow what we're about to use next a good surface to adhere to. So what we're going to be using next, some of you will understand this and some of you won't have seen this done before, but we're going to be using some hairspray. So if you're familiar with this, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with this, this is essentially cheap chipping medium. You know, if you're using this, it dries, creates a film that can be water activated. So what we're going to be doing is giving the model, or the entire model, a spray with this. So we have to shake it up. Now there's two ways we can do this. We can just spray the model from the can, or we can decant some of it into the lid and then brush it on. But I prefer to just spray it on and just let it settle. So I'll take the cap off and very quickly just spraying very lightly onto the model. And what we'll do here as well is take the turret off to make sure we're not missing anything. And what we're looking for is an even coat of the hairspray over the entire miniature. So when you're seeing it shining in the light, you're not seeing any speckly sort of appearance to it, that it has definitely coated the entire miniature. It also smells amazing. So make sure we get the turret as well. And then because I've been holding the turret by the end of the gun, what I'm going to do is just very lightly place the turret back on and just make sure the end of the gun has a coat of that as well. So we now have to let this dry, and you'll know it's dry when we've started to get like a sort of a satin finish. At the minute it's quite gloss, especially where I've just sprayed, but once it's dry it will give a very satin finish, almost a matte finish, but have a little bit of a sheen to it. So while it's doing that, let's talk about what this causes for us, or what this gives us. This gives us a barrier between the olive drab green and the transfers that we've put down and the subsequent colour that we're going to put over the top, and we're going to be airbrushing that. Because if we brush it on, the chances are the paint will be too thick, there'll be too much water content, and it'll start to reactivate this. And if it does that, there's a chance that the paint that we're going to spray on, or the paint that we're going to apply over the top of this, will actually catch onto the olive drab and be permanent. It won't be removable. But because we have all this hairspray on, when we come in to use our air white scar paint through our airbrush, we're going to thin it fairly heavily, I would say. Even for an airbrush paint, we're going to go fairly heavy and spray very lightly. So it'll be quite patchy. And what that'll do is once that's all dry, we can then take a little bit of a damp brush and we can start to remove that again. And that wouldn't work if we didn't have some sort of barrier, either chipping medium or in this case hairspray. Chipping medium will do the exact same job, can be airbrushed on as well if you fancy a smoother finish. However, hairspray is just as effective and is always a fun little thing to show off. And hopefully we're going to be showing that off once this part has dried. So the hairspray has dried. It's taken about 15-20 minutes or so to be as dry as I want it to be. We're now going to be moving on to applying our white paint. And as I said before, we're going to be using White Scar, which is the CITADEL air paint. We've thinned it roughly 2-to-1 just to make it a little bit thinner in the cup. And we've just thinned that with water again, just to keep it simple. So when I switch the compressor on, we're going to be applying our white all over the miniature. And in fact, we're going to remove the turret yet again. Not too worried that there's a bit of undried hairspray in there, not a big deal. So it's going to be quite patchy, so let's just start applying it. So our white paint is now settled for a little bit. It's now time to get the magic going. And for this, we're using a small dry brush, a small CITADEL dry brush, and just a little bit of water. So what I'm going to be doing is dampening the brush, making sure the bristles have got plenty of water on them. And hopefully what's going to happen here is as we apply the brush with the water in it and move it along, you can start to see it happening already there. The hairspray that we've put down is starting to reactivate, and as it does, it lets the white paint move and come back off the vehicle. So we can just slowly work away at this, taking away as much or as little as we want. So what I'm kind of aiming to do here is go a little heavier on the upper lines and then a little bit more heavily along the bottom where moisture and mud and stuff would have naturally started to work the paint back off again. And what I'm also going to do is work a little bit heavier where our transfers are and just get that paint away to make it look like they've been purposefully left clean, as they should have been, to keep the vehicle's identification visible. And you can see the difference there. That's quite a nice looking effect there. And we don't want to go too much on that. We just want to make sure that enough of the white comes away from the likes of the star and the number to make it look like they've just kind of hastily applied this stuff and tried to avoid those markings as best they could. Something like that. And we have a little line here, we could get a little bit more there. What we really want to do is make sure that we're taking it away in areas that make sense. That, you know, areas where people will have been climbing on the vehicle, moving around, scraping along the side of it. So, for example, definitely want to be a lot heavier up on the top of the hull and on the top of the turret in particular. I want to remove quite an amount of paint off that. So let's take the turret off. Particularly around crew hatches, we almost want to bring it right back to the base olive drab. We can leave a little bit there just below where or between the two hatches, but we can largely remove it off these two hatches because we know these are very high wear areas. Every time the crew get out or back in again, we're going to see that paint getting damaged or that whitewash getting worn away. What we can do here is just streak a little bit. Remove it quite heavily off the mudguards. Off the top of our bow machine gun, because that's a favourite spot to put your feet when you're climbing up onto a Sherman. I know this from experience. And again, off this other mudguard. And you can go as heavy or as light as you want when doing this, especially if you're doing this in a production line where you're doing, you know, maybe 4 or 5, you know, if you're doing a whole platoon at a time, you can really add some serious individuality and some serious character to the machines by doing this. And again, we're going to carry this sort of heavier removal along the top of the hull. Let it gather in where the lip is to protect the turret, but largely remove it off the top of the hull. Maybe in some places along here, not so much. And again, don't forget about your markings. Just remove it enough off the face of them. And it can look quite magic. I quite enjoy doing this. It's very therapeutic. And again, with a lot of things World War II wise, particularly color choice and you know, wear and tear and weathering and stuff like that, there's no real wrong answer to doing this. It's really down to a matter of personal taste, how much you want to remove. So I'm going to continue this on across the whole vehicle, going heavier on the top and leaving the sides a little bit more clean, a little less worn. And then when we come back, we'll see what the overall effect is. So with all the distressing now finished, we can have a look at the vehicle and we can see just the level of removal I've went for here. And it's, again, like I was saying before, it is primarily on top of the vehicle. We want the upper surfaces to have a fair amount of wear compared to the sides, because that just makes sense. You know, if there's infantry and stuff climbing all over your vehicle, all this whitewash, which isn't really sealed down with anything, is going to wear and fade over time. So with that done, I went ahead and gave the model another coat of my ultramatte varnish. That's just to make sure that everything that has hairspray still underneath it, which is basically anything that's still white, is going to be sealed and protected in case we do anything silly. Now, want to move on and start to enhance this sort of whitewashed appearance a little bit, because it's a little bit dull in places. It's not bad. You could completely go ahead with this and just continue on to a weathering step after this. But I want to do a bit more. So we're going to be getting some PRAXETI white, and we're going to be adding a little bit of streaking. So this is going to be a bit odd because I'm taking the dry brush paint and we're going to put it onto my wet palette. And what I want to do with this is sort of not dry brush, but I want to apply it in a very particular way. So Let's see what it looks like on my hand first. I think that's right. And what I want to do is add little bits of brighter white in such a way that it's giving me a bit more interest, a bit more texture to the white, and letting me add in a little bit more here and there. And what this is doing is making it look like some of it is running or has become damp. It's also adding a little bit of a highlight stage to the edges of the white that aren't completely greened away. And it's just adding a bit more visual interest to the model. With that step done, it's fairly brief and pretty easy to do. It just gives us another layer of a lighter color on top of the white that we've already done, and gives us a little bit of weathering to the whitewash in particular. So it just adds something. I can't really describe it that much. I'm not that artistically minded. It just adds texture. It adds another layer of something going on. Pretty easy to do and pretty quick. So the next thing I'm going to do is move on to a little bit of base coating. Sorry, I completely lost myself. We're going to be base coating the tracks, and we're going to be using shining silver for that. I'm probably also going to go ahead and base color the machine guns, because we have the bow machine gun and the machine gun on top. And if I had the paint to hand, we're going to be using CITADEL lead belcher for that, and also going to be going across the tools and stuff as well. So this is just going to be an off-camera base coating step, because I don't need to teach you guys how to base coat or color in things. So we have all the tools back here, and on the back of the engine deck, they're all going to be colored as well. And we're just going to get on with it. We're going to start with the track, and it's going to be the same process for everything. Now, the reason I'm going shining silver for the track is because I'm going to be building up a mud effect, or I'm going to be applying a mud effect later on. And what we're going to be doing is using this as the brightest edges to the track. So a lot of it's going to be covered in mud, but the edges are going to be showing silver through it. So we're going to be base coating this, and then base coating all the other items. And when we come back, we can start into our weathering. Right, we've done all the base coating that we want to do. You can see the tracks are very, very shiny. Don't worry, that'll change. We're going to do a quick rundown of the colors that we've used here. So on the tools, on the wood part of the tools, we have used Vallejo flat brown. So that's one. We've used for the metal on the machine guns, so the turret machine gun and the hull machine gun, we've used scale color black metal. And let me see here, is there anything else? We've just used a flat black, any flat black. I'm going to put up an ABBADON black here, just for the metal parts of the tools on the back here. The flat brown has also been extended to the handles on the back of the 50 caliber and the cocking handle on that gun as well. I feel like when we're doing a winter scheme, we want to be putting more little colors into the vehicle, more little details to break up the brightness of the miniature. We've also applied some black into some of our periscopes. So we have the two rotating periscopes on the front crew hatches, which are painted black. The end of the gun barrel is black. The periscope for the gunner and the one for the loader, and then the little ring of vision ports on the cupola for the commander as well also have a little bit of black paint in them. Again, this is just to help break up the white a little bit more, and it only stands to be reasonable that these periscopes would be active while the vehicle is buttoned up, while all the hatches are shut. They would have had the periscopes fitted to these hatches, and the gunner's periscope will always sort of be there unless he's cleaning it. Same with the loader. So it just makes sense to just have a few of those little splashes of color, those little details that as you get closer to the miniature, you can see, yes, the person who's painted this has actually went in and done that, you know, broken up this this whitewash and made it look a bit more believable. So the next step we're going to be doing is beginning our weathering. So for that, we're going to be using some Agrax Earthshade. And the aim of this is to get into some of the panel lines, not all of them, just some. And the aim is to, again, kill some more of this whitewash that we have. And we're doing that by going into the edges around each of the crew hatches, because we want those to sort of disappear and become a little bit darker. Because again, though there would be water, there would be mud from the crew getting in and out of the vehicle that would be accumulating in these areas. And we want to basically say, yes, I'm aware of that. That's what's happening here. And just start muddying up certain parts of our vehicle. So I'm going to remove the turret just to get in and around the back of these hatches a bit more easily. Like that. Now we're going to leave a lot of the other lines here, because this line in particular, you can see, this would be a weld line or a giant, a larger panel line for this entire section of engine decking to be lifted. So it's not something that's going to be lifted frequently. However, daily maintenance or whatever would require you moving these hatches a bit more often. So I'm allowing a little bit of freedom here to say, yeah, whitewash is probably going to gather in these areas a bit more, even though the vehicle is probably rusting and whatnot. The paint's probably coming off at some point. If this thing's had an engine change at some point, this has all come off and the engine's come out. Down here as well, this line here that runs along the edge and up along here, these would be weld. This would be a welded part, so we're not going to touch that. We're going to let the whitewash settle in there and stay in there. Now, the other thing I want to do to start with the weathering process is in the fuel cap, the filler caps. So here and here are where your two fuel fillers are. This one in front here is for the auxiliary generator that the Sherman has. I'm going to put a bit of Agrax in and around those filler caps, because that's going to represent a little bit of buildup of grime from just refilling the fuel tanks. And we're also going to take a bit of a streaking effect down the side of the hull as well, again just to represent a bit of spillage going on there. And same on the other side. Just let it build up into that space. And then we can carry it a bit more cleanly. We can carry it down the side. And just let that run down the side of the vehicle. Like that. And it just adds a bit more interest. So if you're wondering why I'm picking certain areas for streaking, it's because, and this is really nerdy, I do apologize, but on a Sherman, on a real Sherman, this lip isn't solid. There is a drainage hole down in the bottommost part of it. So that's where the fuel would be spilling out of if they're spilling it while refilling the fuel tanks. Yeah, I know that's a little nerdy, but knowing is knowing. I'm also going to put a little bit around the generator fuel filler as well. Again, there would be a hole for it. There's a drainage hole just roughly where these two details meet. We'll let that run down like that. Again, nothing too substantial here. We're just messing around with it a little bit. These other filler caps, this one's radiator, I believe. If we're running on a GAA V8 in this, in the M4A3, so I imagine the radiator cap, filler cap is this, and these two are probably oil, access to oil for the oil coolers or oil header tanks, something like that on the GAA. I can't remember because the GAA sort of orientates that way in the vehicle, and at each end there's a carburetor. Yeah, there is a header tank. There is a small header tank up here. So this one might actually be oil, and these two might be coolant. I can't remember. We've also got a central line down here. I'm a bit disappointed this star transfer didn't settle as well as I'd hoped it would, but that's just because the film was just a little bit thicker, as I'd mentioned before. So yeah, that's basically all we're going to do there. And then we're going to do the same on the turret. Again, we're going to get into that hatch. Yeah, and I think that's all we're going to do on the turret. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to put the Abrax away, and we're going to bring out some Nuln Oil. This is going to be pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be going onto the machine guns. It's also going to go onto the engine grill a little bit as well. Again, in an effort to kill down some of that whitewash. So on the machine gun, pretty straightforward. We're just giving the whole gun a layer of that. And for anyone curious, here's more nerdy stuff for you. You can see I've left part of the gun with the whitewash effect on it. These are actually separate parts to the machine gun itself. So this whole cradle here is exactly what I just said it is. It's a crutch or a mounting point for the gun to pivot up and down. So if you're painting these and you want a little extra detail that'll satisfy yourself, maybe not your friends, just leave this little piece out here in the bare color of the tank. So whether you're doing whitewash or whatever. Yeah, I know. Shush. Stop laughing at me. So a little bit on the hull machine gun. And then we'll look at the engine deck. Slew our turret to one side. And we just want to get in basically into this whole rectangle shape to just dull that down as much as we can. This would have been easier had we not put the star on the back of the engine deck, but I think it looks good being in that position, so we're going to have to deal with it. Our tank is ready for mud. Mud is interesting, mud is fun. So we're going to be using 3 materials for this. We're first going to be starting with Green Stuff World Mud Effect. This is a clear resin that dries, and as it dries, it creates little ripples and cracks and stuff in it. Works really well, dries gloss as well. So we're going to be taking some of that. And if I have a brush I want to use for this, I think I'm just going to use this one. So scoop some of this stuff out. You can see how thick this is too. It's great. Scoop that onto my wet palette. I'll put a bit more in there like that. Wash the brush. Not that it matters, we're going to be mixing it with that brush in a minute. Then we have pigment powders. So my base color I want to be a dark brown earth. That's a really deep brown mud. So this is quite dark as well. So what I'm going to do is sprinkle some of it onto, let's say about that much, onto our mud effect. And then we're going to stir it all in. And this is going to give us a very sloppy wet mud. What we can do is we can add a bit of water and thin it a little bit too. We don't want to do too much of that, as it'll start to cancel the effect out. Now, here comes the fun part. We get to apply it to the tank. So what I'm going to aim for first is the innermost details. So I'm going to get into between the suspension units and get quite heavy in there. Really slap it in there nice and thick. In and around the back suspension unit and the idler. We're then going to apply it to the underside of the nose. Again, quite heavy. Sort of stipple it and move it around a little bit. Just bring it up to the edge of the nose there, to the underside. Something like that. And then again, quite heavily in between our suspension units. Now, we're going to move on to the tracks, and we're going to take some more of this, keep it as thick and as heavy as we can. And what we're going to do is just work it in, practically brushing it on Trying to get into as much of it as possible. Now, what I'm going to do is clean my brush off. And we're going to lightly thin some of our mud effect out. And basically just blend our suspension units and stuff in. Just give them a coat of this that's a little bit thinner and won't settle as much into our drive sprocket. What I'm going to do now is take a small dry brush. I'm going to dampen it just a little bit. And what I'm hopefully going to be achieving here is wiping the outermost areas of the mud effect back off again. And what that's going to show, or what it's going to lead to show, is mud just sloughing off again and just gathering up in the deeper parts of the vehicle, the deeper details. And we're also going to be working it on the tracks. As you can see, I'm getting it a little bit up onto the hull, not too worried about that. But this is where I was saying, you know, we were painting the tracks a very bright silver, because what is going to be revealed of the track is going to be fairly minimal. And it'll make more sense as it's being done. And hopefully you can see what I'm trying to achieve here. That's what I'm aiming for across the whole vehicle with the mud effects. While we're also at this stage, because we have our little dry brush here that has some of the effect on, we can also take the thinner, just essentially just brown paint at this point, and just streak it and pat it into areas of high wear on the vehicle. So again, we're looking at areas where crew members have been crawling all over it. Or people have been getting on and off. And that mud is just streaking down the vehicle. We can pat it on a little heavier on the top of the hull again. Just around these areas where people have definitely been walking around it and stuff like that. And what we get is quite an interesting, quite, I would argue, quite realistic effect that we're getting. So just stippling it a little bit in places. You're just wiping it as well, just to stain rather than to gather up too much. And again, anywhere we think we could get away with adding a little bit more here and there. I think that's looking pretty used, pretty heavily used. So we'll do a little bit of streaking down the hull from the top as well. Just add a bit more to that used, worn sort of look. And again, on the top of the turret, there's definitely going to be people walking around here. And what it does quite nicely is helps blend in the white and the olive green a little bit better. And we just get to add so much character to the vehicle by doing this sort of stuff. Because this whitewash is only going to remain pretty crisp looking from the day it's new, and basically beyond that, no, it's going to be a bit more messy. So what I'm going to do is continue on with what I've been doing here, get the other side done, and then when we come back, we'll have a look and see if there's any little extra bits and pieces that we want to do. So with the mud effect down and dry, I gave the upper hull areas another matte coat just to settle the mud on the top of it. I didn't want the upper hull to be as shiny as the wet mud that's down in and around the suspension. And even then, you can see the bits that I wiped away dried a little bit more matte than the stuff that's further inside. And yeah, I think in general we've got pretty much a good solid looking scheme here. So the one thing I'm going to do now, and you can tell because I'm holding a pencil, I'm going to pencil in some wear lines. So we will need another layer of varnish on this afterwards. But what we're doing is bringing some areas to bare metal. And again, it's going to be areas of high wear. So you can see just these areas here along the top of this armor panel. A little bit along there too. Something like that. And then we'll smudge it in a little bit. And this is just to add a little more visual interest. You don't need to do this step if you don't want to, which is absolutely fine. I just like adding a little bit of exposed metal here and there. And we can sharpen that line up a little bit. There and there. So let's pull the turret off real quick. And we'll just add a little bit here and there. Just to give us a bit of, you know, a change of texture again is the main thing that I'm aiming for here. So smudging it a little bit. You can get pencils weathering, specific weathering pencils that do this as well, but it's essentially the same thing. And we're just going to work around certain areas of the miniature, like the edges of these hatches and stuff like that, just to bring in or define the edges because of the mud. The mud effect has sort of hidden some of that. And the more we do here, the more interesting it's going to look. And again, it just reinforces the fact that the vehicle is being used. You know, people are crawling all over it and standing on it and whatnot. So only just a little bit of work here we're going to do. So particularly on the turret edges. All areas of high wear. We'll just smudge that in a little bit. Then we can even drag it down just to stain the edge or down the sides. Something like that. Nothing too fancy there. Just enough to make it visible. And on the commander side, a bit there and a bit there, and then again we'll smudge it a touch. And I think once that has a final coat of varnish on it, I think that is going to be our vehicle finished. So we're going to take it away, give it a final coat of varnish, and then when we come back we'll have a look at the vehicle finished with a nice decent background. So here we have it. This is our Sherman Jumbo all finished, and I think I'm particularly proud of this one. You guys can let me know in the comments what you think, but I think we've achieved something that is nicely worn, has a nice winter scheme on it that works. You know, it looks realistic, it's easy to achieve, and hopefully for you guys that are painting lots of this stuff, if you want to go down this route, is fairly easily repeatable with not too many products either, not too many different things involved. So in general, I quite like keeping the mud along the bottom of the hull looking a bit fresher, a little more wet, while everything on top has sort of had a bit of time to dry. Perhaps this is sort of a January, February period in 45, perhaps, you know, where the sun is starting to come back out again, maybe. But in general, I quite like what we've got here. It's very gritty, it's quite realistic. It has a lot of elements to it that are quite interesting. And if you're doing this across multiple vehicles, each vehicle is going to look different. And that is something that painting an Allied army can cause you some problems, because making stuff like this look individual is a little bit of a stretch. So a winter scheme is definitely one way to do that. Now, obviously with the German stuff, you've got the 3-tone camouflages and different schemes that they have. But in general, I quite like this one, and I hope you guys did as well. I hope you enjoyed watching it. So, as always, for now, thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you again very soon.